So, welcome, Petri, and off you go.
Thank you, Robin. So, fantastic that all of you are here, part of this December edition of Breathing Arts, IBF International Breathwork Foundation's this event. And as Robin already said, these are part of like how breathing and creativity can be intertwined, put together, placed together in different various ways. And as I said already to Robin previously here, maybe somebody wasn't around. I have never been part of this before. And so I don't know exactly what has been taking place previously in these events. So with Robin, we met originally this summer in the Netherlands, where there was the JIC 24. This summer in end of July, I was one of the keynote speakers there, and then Robin talked me about this events that they are doing around once a month. And I was immediately interested of being part of it and wanting to, for example, now today to speak about respiratory poetry or poetry of breathing and poetry of air. My my plans of I have made this title for my speech or presentation / workshop, because we will be doing some practices also, and not only me giving a presentation. But my plans kind of got quite switched to different what I was planning to do originally, because my original I'm still going to speak about, and we're gonna be dealing with the respiratory poetry and so on. But the title, I'm not sure if I'm going to, how much I will go into this title that I promised, which was the transformative joy and enchantment of respiratory poetry. Because what happened was that I was quite sick just a few days ago. For 1 week, I had over 39 degrees of fever, like 103 Fahrenheit of fever for 1 week. So my plans went quite like different. So I wasn't prepared in a way that I wanted to do this. So, but I didn't want to cancel this thing. So how this now came out to be, we will see. But definitely I will be talking about, and we will be dealing this question of poetry of air and poetry of breathing. But it will be a little bit different than what I promised in the somebody is in the waiting room, Robin. Yeah, so it will be a little bit different than what I promised in in those words that I was describing what's going to happen here. I will be still mentioning some of those poets, but not all of them, because I truly didn't have enough time to dive into their poetry. But I will be talking today about Rilke, a little bit of Rilke's poetry, at least, and then another favorite poet of mine, a French poet, Eugen Gilevik. And then I will be speaking about definitely what I said about the French philosopher Gaston Bachelard's ideas about respiratory poetry and aerial poetry. And then also we will maybe a little bit go into German-speaking Nobel Prize winners Elias Canetti's some thoughts from him connected to breath, which then connect with these ideas that I will be talking today. And then we will start with a little breath practice, just to calm things down and like attune ourselves into this mode and this question of respiratory poetry, with little breathing practice, and then later we will do certain kind of voice and breathing practices connected with this respiratory poetry. And then in the end of this session, we will have a Q&A, questions and answers or discussion if you have ideas and comments and or some challenges to my ideas. And I will be also very happy to talk with you then. But let's start with just a little practice of breathing. Just place your hands on your chest, close your eyes, and just listen to the breath in your chest. And calm down and let the wisdom of the breath come to you and let it breathe you. And smile while you are breathing. Enjoy that breath that comes to us, that air that fills ourselves and takes care of us each and every moment of our lives. And let each breath attune you to what you could be thinking of, what atmosphere of poetry could be when if it's connected with breathing and with atmosphere of air. Then change the place of your hands and put them on your belly after they have been on your chest. And then in a similar manner, let the breath find your belly. And have this kind of inner smile with each breath that comes to you. And feel how you are expanding with each in-breath and how you are contracted and becoming smaller with every out-breath. And follow those little nuances, how little by little you become bigger and bigger and bigger. By the way, Robin, there is again one person waiting in the waiting room. And then with each out-breath, feel how you are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. And again, when the new breath comes, how you start to enlarge. And enjoy that feeling of enlargement. How big can you become with one breath? And then enjoy that feeling of shrinking. and feel how the breath loves you, how it takes care of you. There is no bigger love than keeping somebody alive. And the breath knows that exactly how to do it. We don't know ourselves how to keep ourselves alive, but the air and the breath know how to do it all the time. That is the deepest level of wisdom of the breath. Okay, then very slowly as possible, before, like you have never opened your eyes, open your eyes like it's the first time of your life, like it's the biggest miracle there is, as slowly as possible. Like you're a little bit peeking first of like what's out there in the world. And if I will be a little bit coughing, it's because I'm not totally recovered from my influenza. And also, this is the first time I will be speaking such a long time in a row. So I hope my voice will be doing fine after over an hour. Let's see. There might be people who have never met me, so I think before we go into the subject matter, I could introduce myself a little bit. So my name is Petri Berndtson. I am by training a philosopher, and why Robin has invited me here and why I was also invited as a keynote speaker in this year's JIC in the Netherlands is because my speciality or my specialization in philosophy is philosophy of breathing. I wrote in 2018 or defended my PhD on ontology of breathing, which means I defended it on the topic of how breathing is connected in the philosophical question of being and existence and questions connected with the ultimate reality, and how breath has a very essential part to play in this, how would I say, how the world is built to ourselves in a meaningful manner. And also in 2018, I co-edited with another philosopher, Professor Leonard Scoff, the first anthology on philosophy of breathing called Atmospheres of Breathing, which came from University Press, SUNY Press. And then last year came out my first book, which is based on my PhD called Phenomenological Ontology of Breathing. And that came from Routledge. And to my true joy, a few months ago came the paperback version or edition of my book. So now it's much more affordable than it was when it was only this university publication as a hardcover. It was crazy price. Now it is much more affordable price as a paperback. And my as I call myself a respiratory philosopher, and I coined the phrase respiratory philosophy in 2010, and I am very happy to say that when I coined it in one article, this phrase or term respiratory philosophy in 2010, now it is being used by quite many academic people who are also interested of breathing as a question of philosophy and humanities and social sciences. And we had 2023, we had the first international conference on respiratory philosophy in Slovenia, which was a fantastic event. So that for introduction for myself, let's go into the subject matter. So today I will be talking about this question of breathing in poetic manner. Let's see how much it will be connected with what I had a description in the web page of breathing arts, but at least it will be in different manners of what does it mean to connect breathing and poetry and air, atmosphere of air and poetry. I also, in my PhD in 2018, there was a part about poetry also. So I will start with a few poems from one of my favorite poets, French poet Eugen Guillevic, who I also mentioned already before in the beginning. And before we go to few of Eugen Guillevic's poems about air, I want to read what Eugen Guillevic, who lived in the 20th century, said of himself. He said, "I'm a prehistoric man. I live more in the elements than in society." And this question of living more in the elements than in society will be a major theme in today's presentation. And also perhaps this question, what could it mean to be a prehistoric man? Something which is opposite to what we normally call history. Again, there is somebody in the waiting room. So Guillevic calls him, he lives more in the elements than in the society. And when he says elements, he means the four classical elements of the element of fire, the element of water, the element of earth, and the element of air. And we will be talking a little bit about the other elements also, but then we will focus on the element of air and breathing later. But I read to you few of Guillevic's air poems now, which I have translated myself, and they are rough translations, so I'm not a professional translator. So the first one of the Guillevic's poems goes like this. They are almost always very short. And to read truly a poem, you need to read it again and again and again to kind of like get the taste of that poem, to chew it in your mouth, to listen it as carefully as possible. So, in the first poem, Guillevic writes, "During the night, the air might touch the leaves in a different way." So what does he say? Here he mentions, of course, the question of the air. And he says that during night, that there is a different kind of atmosphere in our lives during night. And that maybe the air in our lives appears in a different manner during night. So during the night, the air might touch the leaves. And of course, the air, if we start to wonder what the experience of air is, the air is something which, of course, we are all the time connected to it. It is all the time touching us, and it's touching the leaves all the time. For example, here behind me, the air is surrounding and touching everything. But most of the time, we are not so much conscious of how the air is touching the leaves, how the air is touching us, how the air is touching the glasses or our clothes and everything else in our lives. But actually the air touches very differently things during the daytime and during the nighttime. And in different kind of atmospheres, the air touches things in a very different kind of way. And I got a very strong feeling of this, how the air can touch things in a very different way when I was living in Greece, in the island of Crete, where the air is much more moist than the air is in Finland. And this happened when I had just moved there. We had left cookies on the kitchen table. And in Finland, when you leave the cookies on the kitchen table or wherever, the next morning you can go and eat them. Okay, these are the same cookies. But in Crete, the next morning I taste the cookies and I'm like, what has happened to these cookies? Like, are they like, they were still fine yesterday evening, but now they are not fine anymore. Their taste has become they are not so crispy anymore. And then little by little, I started to understand this is connected by the moistness of the air, that the air quality is so different than the dry air here in Helsinki, in Finland, where I live now and where I am originally from, which means that in Crete or some other places where the air is moist, it touches the cookies and touches the things in a very different way than it touches in Finland. And what does it mean then for human beings? How differently then does the air touch us in different places depending on the quality of the air, the dryness or the moistness, or is it the air of the lands or the lowlands, like in the Netherlands, it means the lowlands, or if it's in the mountains. How different is this kind of air, and how it affects human beings, how it affects things, how these kind of invisible things that we normally don't at all get ourselves connected with, and which don't come to our minds very easily unless we experience these things, how much these affect our lives. And here Gilevik is talking about that in this kind of poem, is when he says, during the night the air might touch the leaves in a different way. Okay, so this is the first of the poems of Gilevik, the aerial poems. The second one of these aerial poems of Gilevik goes like this. In the air, there are sometimes gaps that you can slip into to discover yourself. Okay. Let's listen again this poem, and I read it even more slowly. In the air, there are sometimes, perhaps not always, but sometimes, gaps. How can there be gaps in the air if it's invisible? That you can slip into to discover yourself. So in a certain way, we could understand that the air itself is a certain kind of gap. It gapes, like the word gap and to gape, which means to yawn, they are etymologically connected, gap and gape, to gape. And for example, if you live in London and you go to the tube, to underground in London, it always reminds you, mind the gap that you don't drop in that hole between the platform and the train. And so there is this hole. So, but in the air itself, which is invisible, which we don't see, maybe there are these kind of gaps, certain kind of holes or certain kind of resting places, or some kind of secret places where we can find ourselves and perhaps relax and find or discover ourselves in a new manner. Gilevik is kind of like making us wonder of this, becoming wonderos. And this is the whole point of what poetry is all about, is to start to wonder the most everyday things in the world and start to find from those most everyday things in the world the mysterious, to start to find something and discover something and understand and experience something which we perhaps normally haven't thought at all or have not wondered at all. If we think of, okay, let's go to that later, but just to get into this atmosphere of these poems. So is it possible that sometimes there is this kind of a gap in the air where we could discover ourselves in a new way, perhaps to breathe in a new way, if we would find this kind of invisible gap in the air? Then the next one of these Gilevik's poems goes like this: air quake, and on your palm, as if a bird's wing is there. I will read it again. Air quake, and on your palm, as if a bird's wing is there. So what is he saying? The first verse is just one word, his new made-up word, airquake. We know what earthquakes are. Earthquakes are something that the whole true catastrophe, when the whole earth is moving and things go into rubble and are destroyed, and people are dying and their houses are destroyed and so on. But now Gilevik is thinking that there might be also not only earthquakes, but airquakes, something that totally interrupts our normal ways of in the air. And is it possible that there is happening all the time certain kind of airquakes that are in an invisible manner shaking and vibrating our lives in a way that if we would tune ourselves in a new way, we would notice these kind of what could perhaps be elemental quakes of the earth, of the air, sorry. And then he says that there takes place this kind of airquake, and on your palm, as if there is bird's wing. And of course, what is this bird's wing as a metaphor? Is it something that to be free like a bird, that happens this kind of certain kind of airquake and you find new freedom in your life? Or is it some kind of new possibilities in your life which gives you like the wings to see things in a new way, perhaps from the higher perspective, or to fly in a new way in your life, to be inspired like a bird? What could this all of mean? Of course, in poetry, the possibilities are vast to start to think what could this kind of very short poem with the mysterious meaning could mean, and it could have various different kind of meanings. I read it once more. Air quake, and on your palm, as if a bird's wing is there. Then I read the last one of these explicitly Gillevik's air poems. And again, this is 4 verses. They are very short normally. And this is especially now as the last air poem of Gillevik for this presentation and this workshop, is a certain kind of well-wishing of what this could mean if we get connected with the element of air in a poetic manner, in a respiratory manner. The air today is not ordinary air. It bears fruit. So Gillevik speaks about ordinary air, something that we take for granted each and every moment, which we normally don't even notice, like in our own apartments, because it is invisible and it doesn't block us. It is there all the time, but we don't notice it because normally we notice and put our focus in what we can see and what we can touch. But because air is invisible, it is very often we can forget it. And for example, French philosopher Lucy Irigaray talks about the forgetting of air in Western culture, that actually it is the Western culture that has forgotten the phenomenon of air in this kind of experiential manner, almost whole of its history. For example, philosophers and humanities studies and in our educational systems, we rarely speak in an experiential manner what air could be and how it kind of sustains our life in a deep manner each and every moment. Like if we think of our apartments, like that we take this air that our apartment is filled with from the floor to the ceiling, and all our books here and all our clothes and everything, the air is taking care of them each and every moment. But if I would make this kind of like a magical trick and like simsalabim, and it would all turn from air to water in a second, first of all, this whole presentation wouldn't mean anything to anybody because everybody would be trying to rush away from their apartments because we couldn't breathe and we couldn't be in those apartments, which air is taking care of each and every moment. And all those books behind me would be destroyed in a very short while. And those plants would be soaked to death if they would be filled, that they wouldn't have that air connection anymore. And this whole apartment would be destroyed in a quite fast manner. All the wooden floors would be destroyed and so on. So it is actually the air that it is taking care of all that we normally take for granted. Or if that room would be filled with fire, element of fire immediately, everything would be changed and destroyed very fast. So it is actually the air in some kind of secret manner that we take for granted each and every moment, that we don't actually understand how that air is affecting us all the time. Because that air that we are normally used to speaking about in scientific manner, like that it's made out of scientific chemicals like oxygen and nitrogen and some smaller gases. But in a cultural sense and in an experimental sense, it's not at all this kind of chemical gas that the sciences speak of, because we don't experience nitrogen, we don't experience oxygen or carbon dioxide or any of those other gases that the natural sciences speak of. But we see and we are touching and we are in this, it is this gap, which is like that gap that can perhaps all the time be part of our lives. If we think of like, it is this gap that is needed for to be seen anything. Like, I can only see this glass because that invisible air is between us, which transmits that visual experience to me, or between myself and the screen when I'm speaking to you, and how the voice also moves with that air. And that air itself in its visibility is a pure mystery to us. We don't really understand what it is in an experiential sense, because that scientific understanding of air as a natural combination of different gases is not at all what, in a cultural sense and in the interpersonal sense, the air means. Because when we are in connecting and speaking with other people, we don't think of that air in the chemical sense. We think of it in some kind of very strange sense, which we can't grasp at all, that we don't understand what it is. And if Eugen Gilevik says in the last poem that the air today is not ordinary air, it bears fruit. So let's hope that this presentation today bears fruit. And what kind of fruit could that be? What kind of insights, what kind of poems, what kind of new understandings of connected with air and respiration we could gain? What kind of fruit could this moment bear to us if we open ourselves to the question of breathing and question of air in a poetic manner? Okay, so when Gilevik talked about the air in these poems, he meant in a poetic air, this kind of elemental poetic air in our lives that we often do not place our focus on, which is very easy to take granted. But what would it mean to start to wonder it, to start to question and open our senses to it, to start to try to listen that air which is surrounding us all the time, that silence of the air, and it's like invisible mysteries that perhaps it might hold in itself. What kind of air it is when it comes inside us. And here we get into the to the poetics and philosophy of another French thinker, Gaston Bachelard, who is one of my favorite philosophers. And Gaston Bachelard, who lived from 1882 to 1884 to 1962. And Bachelard is the most important philosopher of the elements. He was the one who brought back the four elements, the four classical elements to philosophy from the pre-Socratics, from over 2000, around 2,500 years ago. Because the pre-Socratics, those philosophers who in Greece were thinking philosophical questions and poetic questions and important questions of human life before Socrates, are called the pre-Socratics. And in the thinking of those pre-Socratics thinkers, the questions of elements were the most important. They were thinking things in the atmosphere of fire, earth, water, and air. And then after Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, this kind of elemental thinking started they started to forget it. They started to think that it's somehow naive, or it is not scientific enough, or it is not philosophical enough, and so on. And for example, Socrates started to think in the first place the questions of how to discuss philosophical matters with other people in a certain kind of dialectical and dialogical style. And then the questions of like things and ethics, and questions of good and bad and good life, and definitions of virtues and definitions of things and so on. These started to become the most important philosophical questions. But in the pre-Socratics philosophy, it was the question of elements, in the sense that it was these elements that was the primary question. And then how in this elemental experience, things and human beings appear to us. In a certain way, from Socrates on, these elemental elements were reduced from those questions that they were thinking. But the pre-Socratics thought that this elemental thinking was the number one issue, and then we bring all these other questions into that elemental atmosphere. And it is Bachelard who brings back this kind of thinking in philosophy, and he wrote at least one book about each and every one of those four elements. For example, about fire, he wrote a book called The Psychoanalysis of Fire. And about water, he wrote Water and Dreams. And then in my philosophy, highly important book is his book Air and Dreams, which is his book on the element of air. And then he wrote later two books about the reveries of earth. So what is special about this Bachelard's thinking of the air in connection to the poetry and to the question of poets? Because Bachelard has this kind of very interesting starting point of doing philosophy, because he says that he has learned all of his philosophy from the poets. Poets are his teachers of philosophy and wisdom. It is the poets that are original philosophers for Bachelard, and academic philosophers then learn from the poets what is the most important things in the world. And this is connected in a deep manner with the elements, because Bachelard has this kind of theory that he writes about in these books, is that every great poet is especially focused on certain of the elements. He divides the poets according to these four elements. He thinks that there is, it's like each and every one of the poets is like finds their home especially in one of the elements, that they are like faithful followers and great lovers of certain element. It doesn't mean that they can't be inspired by other elements, but that each great poet is especially inspired by one of the elements. And so he says that there is the poets of the fire, there is poets of the earth, there is poets of the water, and there is poets of the air. And these poets of the air that is my special interest, he also calls the aerial poets. And then poetry is always connected with imagination and creativity. And he has this kind of idea connected to this, is that normally if we think of creativity and imagination, we think that imagination is something which is in the human being, which is, for example, in human beings' head, or we find it in our brains, or that it is in our own creativity, that the poet writes from his or her own imagination. But Bachelard's idea is that it is not, the imagination and inspiration is not in the first place human invention, but that it is the elements themselves that have their own imagination and ways of dreaming, which might sound a very strange idea, especially in our scientific age. But Bachelard is part of a philosophical movement called phenomenology. And phenomenology means, in the first place, to return to our experience of the world. And to return to this, our experience of the world, means to place in abeyance, or to put out of play for a moment all our scientific theories. And the poets for Bachelard are born phenomenologists, which means that to do great poetry is to not be at all in the realm of knowledge. Bachelard calls poetry the realm of not knowing, the non-knowledge. So imagination is something completely different than knowledge. For example, already Einstein said a long time ago that imagination is more important than knowledge. So there is a huge difference between the two. So imagination, according to Bachelard, is in the elements themselves. The elements come to us. They come within us, and they dream their dreams and their imaginations within us. He says that each element has its own style of imagination. So in the general, he talks about elemental imagination, so that the elements have imagination. But then each element has its own imagination, own style of imagination. So he speaks about, for example, aquatic imagination, which is the imagination of the water, and then the air's imagination is aerial imagination. So it is the element of air that comes within us and dreams its own kind of dreams within us. For example, when we sleep and we see dreams, and what happens in falling asleep is that when we go to sleep, we of course withdraw ourselves from the world. Mostly we withdraw. We don't anymore hold things, and we don't do our everyday activities and so on. And we close our eyes and we withdraw into our beds, and we are not connected with the thingly world and our everyday practicalities and so on. But we withdraw into our beds, and what happens is when we close our eyes and we become as immobile as possible, we don't move in the bed and so on, and we put the lights off and try to become as silent as possible, and we try to become as dead to the world as possible. And the more dead we become, the easier it becomes to fall asleep. But the only connection that we keep during the sleep is our breath. That is still keeping us alive. So that means that during the night, the air, the invisible air, comes to us while we are breathing. And thus, Bachelard thinks that often our dreams during the night, for example, if we see flying dreams, that we are flying in our dreams, these flying dreams are aerial dreams. They are effect of the aerial imagination. So this idea of that each element has its own kind of imagination, we can start to think of it and become familiar with it, is that if we become close with the elements and we are in as deep connection to the element as possible, to our mind starts to come unique ideas that wouldn't come to our mind. We wouldn't be inspired to think or see visions or see images in our mind if we wouldn't be in contact, in an intimate, deep contact with certain kind of element. Think of like when you go to into shower and you sit in the shower and you put that warm water to your body and you relax there under the water, and you are in a deep connection with that water, and how it relaxes you and how the water touches your body, and you close your eyes and that warm water is caressing you in a certain kind of way, and what kind of ideas it starts to give you, what kind of possibilities of relaxation it starts to give you. Perhaps you see certain kind of images that when the water runs on your body and touches you in its own moist manner. Then if you, for example, make the difference to that if somebody has ever been to a mud bath, that you are totally covered in mud, in warm mud, which is the element of earth. So what kind of experiences can you get when you are connected with that earth? Or if you are, like many people maybe haven't been into a mud bath, but for example, if you walk in the nature and you find the huge rock and you start to walk on that rock, and then you find some kind of place where you can rest on that rock, that truly solid material, and then you connect your naked body connected with that rock, and you start to feel how that rock feels, how that rock supports your body, and how it feels, and how you start to become sensitive to it, and how you start to become like wanderers in the nearness of that rock, that solidity, that toughness of that rock. Can you start to feel the imagination and the way of being of that rock? And what kind of dreams start to come to you when you are connected with that rock? So So each of these, poets find their home in some of the elements, and they start to be inspired by that element, and they start to write poetry that is visions. For example, if it's the rocks, the visions from the rocks or the images from the rocks. And in our case, what kind of imagination or what kind of images start to come when we first of all started to listen to these poems by Gilleviks, these aerial poems that I read in the first place? Or when we are breathing, and many of the people here, the participants of this workshop, are breath workers. So we breath workers are lovers of the breath and lovers of air. We are faithful followers of the breath, the faithful followers of the element of air. And through breathwork practices, most of us have had all kinds of different kind of experiences that have grown from the experience of breathing, how the breath has opened us in a bodily way, spiritual way, mental way, in an emotional level, and what kind of visions can these bring to us, and what kind of poetry could we start to begin to write from these kind of experiences as faithful followers and lovers of the air and breath? This would be the challenge of Bachelard to us as breath workers. Now I want to go to one of the poets that I mentioned in my description of this workshop was Rainer Maria Rilke, a German poet. And I started the description by the first verse of his poem, which said, actually I had translated it in a wrong way. It was, Rilke's poem has been translated in numerous ways into English, which tells always that poetry is highly difficult to translate, because it's always a question of interpretation of what the poet truly means, and also that each great poem has actually many different meanings, and it can be in a proper manner interpreted also in very different ways and in different meanings. So for example, this Rilke's poem that I had the first phrase from, I have noticed that it has been at least translated by 10 different translators, and each one of these translations is different from the other. So I read the first phrase from this poem, which says, "Breathing, you invisible poem." And we will dive into this one verse after I have read a little bit more to you of this poem. The poem itself, by one translator whose name is M.D. Herter Norton this time, has translated the poem as following: "Breathing, you invisible poem, world space constantly in interchange with our own being, counterpoise wherein I rhythmically happen, solitary wave whose gradual sea I am, most sparing you of all possible seas, winning of space, how many of these places in space have already been within me? Many a wind is like a sun to me. Do you know me, you air, still full of places once mine? You one time smooth rind, rondure and leaf of my words. And this poem by Rilke is one of the most famous respiratory poems that has ever been written. It is highly quoted by different scholars and different poets, and it is truly difficult to understand all the different meanings that Rilke has put into this poem. But let's begin especially with that first verse, and then open that little bit also with help of Canetti, Elias Canetti, the Nobel Prize winner of literature from 1981, and then also with Bachelard. So first of all, we can of course say that it is piece of respiratory poetry, poetry of breath. And Rilke says in a very unique manner is that breathing, you invisible poem. And that word breathing is in German, Atmen. So normally we think of that the poets write poetry of different kind of topics, and that the poet could write a poem about breathing or about air, as Gilevik wrote those poems about air. But here Rilke is actually saying, in the first place, this of course is a poem about breathing, what he has written, but he is also saying that in the first place, in a more fundamental sense, breathing itself is a poem. How is it possible that breath itself, to breathe itself, is a certain kind of poetic process or a poetic event? That's what Rilke is saying here. He says, breathing, you invisible poem. And if breathing itself is a poem, then to start to try to think what could it mean. First of all, he says it's invisible poem. Of course, normally the poems are written in a sense that we can read them, so they are visible poems. Otherwise, we could not read them because they are written in a visible form, as with letters that we can read. So he says, in the first place, breathing is an invisible poem, something that we don't see. And of course, if it's invisible, it is something that we easily don't notice, because our everyday and ordinary way of being is that we are so eye-focused, we are so vision-focused into the world, we are so focused on seeing things and things that we can touch and grasp and that we can manipulate and so on. Our minds are there, what we can see. Our focus is there, what we can see. And it is easy in the first place to forget breathing. This same French-speaking philosopher, Lucy Irigaray, that I mentioned, who talks about the forgetting of air, she also speaks about the forgetting of breathing. And she says that our Western tradition has almost universally forgotten the question and the experience of breathing, that we live actually in the culture of forgetting of breathing. In our educational systems, don't teach in school the subject of breathing in an experiential manner. In biology lessons, once in a while, they tell what the scientific understanding of breathing is. In universities, they don't have subject that you could master or have a minor in experiential breathing, understand the wisdom of the breath. Work, when you become a professional for the work life, nobody is interested, or most, like 99% of the time, how you breathe or what's your understanding of the wisdom of the breath. So in that sense, it is invisible. On another sense, breathing is invisible, because if he says that breathing, you invisible poem, it means that also that perhaps it is invisible to us as a poem. It is invisible to us in a poetic manner. And here we can make a distinction between poetic and prosaic. The prose of life, like we talk about the prose literature and poetic literature. And these are, prose is like novels and short stories and so on, which is written in a straight manner, normal sentences after each other, in a as understandable manner as possible, in an ordinary way written, and normally using as ordinary phrases as possible, that it becomes as understandable as possible. But poetic expression is totally different. It is creative expression, it is imaginative expression. The poetic expression is trying to invent all kinds of new ways to write and express something that has been in the past experienced in a different way. Another French philosopher, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, says that prose expression is to write in a manner, to use phrases that have been already been used, that are custom-made phrases. But poetic phrases and poetic expression is always to try to express something that has never been expressed before. Try to put into words something that has never been put into words. Try to express perhaps something that we have already experienced, but try to express it in a new way, perhaps in a shocking way, perhaps in a new creative, imaginative way, which makes us to have a sense of wonder, to sense of awe. Oh wow, I've never seen anything like this. This is a totally different way of expressing the things that I have never thought of. The way to use words or invent new ways, new words or new like ways of connecting words together, and so on, and to have their pauses in the between, and to that each word might, like normally when we read fast and we don't think each word. We just read it and we take the words for granted. We don't like pause in front of each word to think and try to listen what that word could mean. Try to wonder that perhaps one word has deep meaning that I have never before understood. Is it possible that that one word or that one verse is full of meaning if I would open myself in a more attentive manner to that word, to that phrase, or to that verse, and start to listen in a new way the wisdom of those words? This is what is connected to poetry. And today we will listen to words in a new manner and start to taste the words, start to wonder the words, to become sensitive for one word, like how do we feel about how one word can taste like, how the one word is sculpted in our mouths and with our breath in a manner that we perhaps never before noticed. Bachelard speaks in his great book, The Poetics of Space, which is his most famous book. He speaks of word dreamers, that certain great poets are word dreamers. They take one word and they think that words are a little bit like houses, that a word is a house. And in our ordinary attitude, in our ways of like prose, in this prosaic, straightforward way of reading and speaking and using the words, when we take the words for granted and we just use them for our communication like we normally use in discussion or by writing and so on, we don't listen to these words. We don't become word dreamers. Start to truly dream with the words and let the word itself start to dream within us. Like I said, that the elements come to us and they start to dream within us. The same way Bachelard says that there are these certain great poets that are word dreamers, that invite words that nobody of us have invented by ourselves, but that the words themselves have their own lives. They have their own wisdom, which if we would start to really open ourselves to these words, they would start to dream in a new way that we normally don't notice when we just take use of these words and we take them for granted. There is a person again on the waiting room. And Elias Canetti, when we read this first verse of Rilke's poem, Atmen, breathing, you invisible poem. Canetti, in his book, The Secret Heart of the Clock, which is full of Canetti's famous aphorisms, he writes in one of my favorite aphorisms, connected with that, what could make us more attentive to that first phrase or the first verse of Rilke's Atmen, breathing, you invisible poem, to start to become quiet in front of that word Atmen, because then there is another German word for the breath, which is even more original, which is Atem. And Canetti writes in German, but this is translated into English. He writes, the German word for breath, Atem, the foreignness of it, as if it came from another language. There is something Egyptian and something Indian about it, but even more it sounds like an aboriginal language. To find those words in German that sound aboriginal, for a start, Atem. So, if we become word dreamers, and let's start to taste in our mouths what kind of feeling it gives to us. if we start to, by ourselves, start to dive into the depths of the German, this aboriginal, or that in German he uses the what is translated as aboriginal language. He uses the word Ursprache, which means like the original language or the earliest language or the primitive language. So if Canetti thinks that the word breath in German, this word Atem, is like a primitive language, primitive word, and we start to dream with that word, and we go Atem, and we start to breathe with that word breath. Where would it take you into? If you think of like, for example, the power of the words, for example, many might have experience of mantra singing, and there you take one word and you are singing that word or one phrase or one verse again and again and again, and that one word or one phrase can take you so deep into the experience. So if we start and we go into this word Atem, close your eyes, put your hand on your chest, and start to taste that word Atem, and say to yourself aloud in different ways with different like speed. And can you slow it down and start to feel how it moves your mouth, how it moves your tongue, how your breath moves with that word? Because pronouncing words, or we can say that we air words, as to air something is same as to express. Actually saying a word or pronouncing a word or uttering a word is a breath play. It is a way to breathe, because we sculpt words by sculpting our breath with our tongue and with our larynx and our vocal cords and with our lips and with our teeth. So we're sculpting words by breathing them out and moving them in our mouths with our lips and tongues and so on. And we start to wonder that we can start to become little by little this kind of what Bachelard called the word dreamers. Atem, atem. And when you go atem, that M in the as a last letter, how does it feel in your mouth between your lips? And that etem, atem. Atem, atem. Atem. I let you little while just to taste that word Atem, that breath in German, which Canetti calls the aboriginal language, the word from somewhere in the early past. Maybe that early past, that some kind of primitivity is still speaking in that word. And maybe it can little by little share its wisdom if we are able to connect in an intimate manner with that word. I will go to get a little bit more water for myself. Then let's go to another word. We will be going to a few of these words and start to dream with them. Another word which is very important in Bachelard's poetic philosophy and in his understanding of what the poets have taught to him is the word soul, but the word soul in French, which is âme. And that word âme is, according to Bachelard, a word of breath. And he says in this book where he says that it's a word of breath, he says here the following. He quotes Charles Nodier, who was his academic mentor. And in connection, when he has said that the word soul, âme, is the word of breath, he quotes Nodier's words: "The different names for the soul among nearly all peoples are just so many breath variations and onomatopoetic expressions of breathing." If we think of the French word âme for soul, first of all, it comes from the Latin word anima. And from that word anima comes also the word animal, and it's normally translated, now my nose starts to get a little bit blocked. It tells that I haven't been speaking. This is the first time after my sickness that I have been speaking for such a long time. So the word anima also is normally translated as soul, but it originally means breath also. And also this French word âme, which is translated as soul, has this etymological connection to word breath. And if we think of the word âme, it is a pure breath word. Like if you go into dreaming with that word, it is just pure the vowel A, which is of course translated as ah, and then there is this M in the end. It's in French, it's written A, M, E, but it's just pronounced So, and Bachelard says that the vowel A as is the vowel of immensity. He says that if we pronounce the words which are full vowel words, or in English A, but pronounced vowel words, that they are the vowels of immensity. And if we pronounce these kind of words and dive deep into the wisdom as word dreamers to these kind of words, he has this word as one of these kind of words. And the other word in this book, Poetics of Space, he has the word vast, which is in English and French pronounced quite similarly, vast, the word synonymous with immensity or immense. And he talks about French poet Charles Baudelaire's poetry, where this word vast is enormously important. Everything becomes in Baudelaire's poetry vast, and vast is also a word connected deeply with breath, because if we think of vast, become expansive, become large, become without bounds, unlimited, limitless, and start to feel how that word, when we breathe, comes to us. So let's go into word dreaming with the immense vowel ah, and with the word vast, and breathe with that vast and become as vast as the word vast itself. Vast. Vast. Like if you surrender your whole life into this vast, the word vast. That it's no coincidence that that word vast is really vast, experientially vast, if you truly surrender yourself into that word, into that vowel ah. And it becomes almost like a pure breath sound. And vowels, of course, are pure breath sounds. And Bachelard says that if we take that word vast into our lungs, into our chest, as deeply as possible, it will cure us ourselves from anxiety and shortness of breath and all kinds of asthma and so on. Which is connected with this, that if when person reads Baudelaire's poetry in French and truly dives deep into this word vast, it has a healing power, because that these are pure breath sounds that heal and massage us from inside. So let's go into this more deeper into this vast, and then feel how that ah turns into st in the end, like first s, and then that t comes there, how it lets the final air out. So become like experimental, like that one word can have inside itself so much if we truly start to taste and wonder and listen what those words are that we normally just use in our ordinary language in the prosaic style. What kind of out-breath is out-breath that airs vast at the same time? Vast. Vast. And final time. Then, if you have your eyes closed, keep them closed and keep your hand on your chest and just listen for a little while. What kind of feeling do you have in your chest? Has the word vast opened some new expanses in your body? Some new gaps or some new rooms or some new spaces in your being? Then let's open our eyes. Then let's take one more word, which is very different, to get a feeling of like how this word dreaming and poetic attitude towards the words in a one way open in a different ways if the word is very different. In this same book, Bachelard has as a last chapter a chapter called The Phenomenology of Roundness. And roundness is, of course, things are round. They are like circles, or they are balls, or the same time, if we think of the word round or German word, because he, in this last chapter of this book, he quotes another poem by Rilke, which is not in an explicit way, in any explicit way, respiratory poem or an aerial poem, but it's a poem about roundness and roundness of the trees. If we take the German word rund or the English word round, we can notice that the word rund for round in German, we can find our mouth and our lips in a round. And when we say a word round, the same way, or we find our lips round. So the words are not often at all pure coincidences. At least some kind of elemental words or some kind of truly deep words have this onomatopoetic connection, that they are imitating the world. It's no coincidence that the word round in German is rund, and the word round is really round. So let's go into the to the English word and really feel like how your mouth and your tongue and your lips sculpt that word round, and that you find your lips really going in the end to this round shape, that we can say that word and become as attentive and as sensitive towards your lips and your mouth, and feel like that, like what kind of sculpting of the breath is that utterance of the word round. Round. You can close your eyes again so it's easier to feel and experience. Round. Round. And everybody can do it by themselves and experiment for a little while. And do it in different ways, like if you do it faster or slower, and does it feel different? And can you say the word round perhaps a little bit in a different styles? So experiment and play with the word round. Okay, then let's close our eyes and let's breathe again to the chest for a little while and become as sensitive to your face and to your lips, and feel like how your mouth, while you're breathing, how your mouth and lips feel like after playing with the word round. Do you find some new sensations from your face or from your lips or tongue or the cavity of your mouth or chest or larynx and so on? Okay, then we can open our eyes and so we have now here been playing with the words in a word dreamer style of what Bachelard speaks of the word dreamers as some of the great poets. And what kind of new approach to the language and the words that we use is that if we start to listen, for example, in this kind of manner, the wisdom of the words that we are using in our everyday lives, and also in connection to our breath, is it possible that we become more better listeners of those words that we use? Is it perhaps we learn to use them in a more creative manner, in a more poetic manner, and also start to connect with our breath in a sense, in a more poetic manner, and to find that to keep in our minds Rilke's first verse, breathing, you invisible poem, and to think of it and live it in the world in a new poetic manner, our breathing and our speaking and the use of words. Now we can start the part of this, the last 15 minutes of this workshop with questions or comments or conversation. How does it work, Robin, now would you be the one who looks if there is people have questions, or if they or what do you suggest?
Yes, I can do that certainly. Maybe I'll kick it off with a comment myself. Get the ball rolling. The ball rolling.
Yes, that's, by the way, good word, ball. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe that's why football is so popular in the world. No, intriguing, really intriguing and fascinating. I learned a lot. As you may know, I'm a singer-songwriter, so I'm already a little bit into choosing the words for my songs. And this is fascinating, really fascinating, and opened up some new spaces for me. Absolutely. So thank you so much for that. I guess poets are philosophers, but they don't know they're philosophers.
Yeah.
And philosophers are poets, but they don't know. It's a bit like that, isn't it? But
Yeah.
fascinating to delve, that's another nice word, delve into the world of philosophy with you. So thank you so much. That was really wonderful. Okay, so anybody else would like to comment, or do you have questions?
At least in the chat there is happening there's 9 things happening in the chat. I don't know, are they questions or comments or?
Okay, let's have a look. How is the German word for breath spelt? And the other word?
Well, I'm not a native German speaker, and I'm not very good in German, but I think it's the first word in Rilke, what the word that Rilke uses in the first phrase of the sorry, the first phrase of his poem that I was reading is Atmen, Atmen. And then the Canetti uses another word, but they are etymologically connected, is atem, which is even more primordial word. But they are etymologically connected, and they are also etymologically connected to the Sanskrit word Atman, and also the English word atmosphere. That atmos is connected to the word, the Sanskrit word Atman, which of course normally is translated as spirit or soul or first principle, but that Sanskrit word Atman also originally means breath, and that Atman and Atem and Atman are they are all connected as well as the word atmos of atmosphere.
So, Antje, you had your hand up first, so there you go.
Yes, thank you very much, Robin. So I'm a German speaker, native German speaker, and for sure I will start to look up the poems of Rilke again. It's something which we learned in school, and I like reading Rilke a lot, but I was not aware that he really used words and connected them to what it does in the body. So it's something I enjoyed also in your presentation, to be much more attentive that with words you can influence your way of breathing and feel really the benefit it has for you, especially these German words with Atmen and Atmung, as you have this long A which you don't write. If you look at the word, it looks much different. So I found all your presentation really very interesting and impressive. And yes, I will try and be much more attentive and apply it to myself. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That's it from my side.
And it makes me always happy when somebody says that they want to start to read Rilke again. That is wonderful to hear. And I can say that, for example, in this book, which is also translated in German, this Bachelard's book, which is written original in French, Rilke is for him one of the most important inspirations. So, for example, in this book, he talks a lot about Rilke.
I think Rilke, I don't know whether he wrote himself in French, but I just looked him up. He's known in the French-speaking world or areas a lot. So maybe he had some knowledge of French himself.
Oh, well, yes, it might be, but to my knowledge, he wrote all of his poetry in German. But he inspired French thinkers really a lot.
Okay, Joseph, you had your hand up. Off you go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, fantastic to see you, Joe, since long time.
2015, right?
Yeah, we met in America, but then we had those interviews when Suzanne and you interviewed me in 2018.
When the first book came out.
Yeah, that was like, yes.
So I don't know how this connects with your theme for the day exactly, but hopefully it does. That Rilke, I read a translation of the Book of Hours by Macy. Macy is her last name, I think. Anyway, she talks about Rilke's conception of God as being the future. You know, when Rilke says the future enters into us long before it happens in order to be transformed by us.
Yes.
And I've been looking for more about that because, you know, I mean, is that somehow we're being dreamed by the future to create the future? Or, you know, he says we are creating God.
Yes.
As our future. Have you come across this with Rilke, or this notion of that he has about his definition of God as the future entering into us?
No, I am not aware of this. I know another poem by Rilke where he talks about God in a respiratory manner, because in the same book of poems, the sonnets of Orpheus, where this breathing you invisible poem is from, there is another poem where he talks about poetry as a different breath about nothing, a gust inside the God, a wind. But I'm not knowledgeable about that poem about how we create God, the future, and how future dreams in us. But I mentioned in the description of my this presentation that was in the IBF Arts webpage, and I quoted there another respiratory poet, the French poet Jules Superville, and here is another poem from him which connects air and breathing with time, which then we can think of like perhaps in connection to future. He writes, "Air that I breathe deeply, so many suns made it dense, and for more avidity, air where time is breathing." So maybe it is that time itself breathes within us. So then if time itself breathes within us, maybe we can think of future breathing within us. And we are kind of this kind of crossroads, or this kind of node of past, present, and the future. And then if we think of that, all of that is in a certain way vibrating in the air. So we could perhaps think that in a certain way future, and that anticipation of that future and what all is there vibrating in the air is perhaps in that sense future is breathing within us. Who knows?
Anyway, most of the main thing was that I just wanted to say it's great to see you again, and great to be with you again, and hopefully there will be more. Oh, by the way, can you put us up if we come to Helsinki?
Sorry, what?
We would love to come to Helsinki. Do you have an
Yeah.
extra room?
I would be happy to give that, but with my wife, we are living in a very small flat. I'm sorry to tell you.
Thank you. Petri, love you. Bye.
Love you too. Nice to see you again.
So, Petri, in the chat, Sarah Dawn has put up some interesting things, and she's talking about, first of all, she says experimentation with the sounds of words and the connection to breath made me think that the sounds that mammals and birds make, particularly mammals, as of course we are mammals, I wonder what philosophical inquiry there is into the sounds that animals make and their connection with their breath and air.
Well, this is a very interesting question. I would answer to this. Of course, there is all kinds of different kind of scientific studies about these matters. But as I am today speaking in connection to the poets, and especially to Gaston Bachelard's philosophy, which is so deeply inspired by the poets, Bachelard speaks about, in the last chapter of his book Water and Dreams, where about how he thinks that language, human language, is very much inspired by what humans originally started to imitate nature sounds, and that all different kind of words, like for example this round, these like that, they are imitations of like the round shapes in the world, and that animals, for example, the birds are imitating the sounds of the nature in their songs, some of the birds, and then human beings' language is inspired by the singing of the birds and the sounds of the different animals. So there is this communication happening all the time through air, through breath, and through our listening. And because like Bachelard says, that everything in the nature, everything in the elemental world is speaking constantly in its mysterious sounds and voices. And all those voices, are they animal voices or bird voices, and birds singing and so on, and natural world sounds and sounds of the winds and the sounds of the oceans, the waves, and so on. All of this inspires and has affected human language and human ways of expression. It's a dialogue between the whole natural world and elemental world and the animal world with human world.
Thank you. And the other thing that Sarah Dawn was saying, she wants to listen to this again. Of course, everybody can listen to it again. The recording will be up on our IBF Breathing Arts YouTube channel. IBF Breathing Arts YouTube channel. As soon as I get it together to put it up there. So in the next couple of days, it will be up there. So you need to check that out if you want to re-listen to some of this or you missed part of it. Okay. And I think we're more or less come to the end of things now. So I'm going to stop the recording now.
Wait, Robin. I want to say a few things just very quickly. So I remind everyone that that this paperback has come from my book, Phenomenological Ontology of Breathing, the Respiratory Primacy of Being is the subtitle of the book. So please, if you are interested, the book can be purchased from Amazon and also Routledge's own page. And then if you are interested more of my thinking, and please follow me, for example, in Instagram. My Instagram account is Mindfunfulness, which is mind and fun and then fullness. So it's mindful, but fun there in the middle, Mindfunfulness. So I post things once in a while there. And then my website is, which is also has an English version. There is an English click. If you want to know more about me in English, is www.ilmapiiri.fi, which ilmapiiri means in Finnish atmosphere, and it's ILMA, which is ilma is air, and piiri, PIIRI, is ilmapiiri.fi. So thank you greatly for participating in this workshop on respiratory and aerial poetry.